Good morning, everyone. Today is November 21st. It's Saturday. It is still 2020 for a few more weeks. And my name is Karen Bodenschatz, and I serve as Associate Pastor at First Lutheran Church in Onalaska, Wisconsin. And this is my morning musing. So tomorrow's readings, it's the readings for Christ the King Sunday. It is the last Sunday of the church year before we enter into Advent, which is the beginning of the year. The end of the year leads into the beginning of the year, right? I should drink some more coffee. And the imagery that we have for this year in Matthew is about sheep. So all of our readings have some sort of mention of sheep in them. And as I was reading through all of them, I really was struck by the psalm. And it's Psalm 95, 1 through 7a, so through the first part of the 7th verse. And it was that first part of the 7th verse that really caught my imagination yesterday as I was reading through these. It says, "For the Lord is our God, and we are the people of God's pasture and the sheep of God's hand." And as I was thinking about that, there was a sense of comfort, right? It harkened back to Psalm 23 in my mind, and then forward to Psalm 121, some of these psalms that remind us of God's presence in our lives, God's protective presence in our lives, comforting presence in our lives. And so that brings about a sense of comfort. And the idea of being in God's pasture or being in God's hand is certainly comfortable, especially in these times. And this morning I was reading the news, and we've hit another milestone after just a week of hitting 1 million cases of coronavirus in our country. We're now at 2 million. That's slightly terrifying. And so, so that comfort of being people of God's pasture and sheep of God's hand very clearly claims us as God's and God's alone. But I also began to think about that identity of who we are isn't a passive identity. And so as I typically do with scripture, I'm like, well, what does that mean then? What does that mean for me as a follower of Jesus, as a leader of a spiritual community? What does that mean for the people that I serve and lead? What does it mean for us as a community and as a country? I always want to know, what does that mean? Is it just that I get to sit in God in the comfort of God's pasture and God's hand, or does that mean something? And I think it does, because it defines who we are. Like, we get to claim that identity as God's, and what that, and all of that, and all of what that means for us. It does mean a sense of comfort and a sense of strong identity, but that identity means something when we're out and about in the world. I thought of, when I'm in my churchy pastor world, the seminary that I went to, it means something. When I tell people I went to the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia in the early 2000s, especially, but any time, they kind of get a sense of my theological training and where I'm coming from as a pastor and a theologian. Just like when somebody tells me they're from Wartburg Seminary or they're from Luther Seminary or any of the other seminaries that we have, you get a sense of that person and the identity and why that person is the way that they are as a leader. When I tell people I'm from Southern California, there's lots of assumptions that come with that. And it's a strong identity. When people tell me they've grown up in the Midwest, especially now having lived here, there's a way that Midwesterners are in the world, just as there's a way that Californians are in the world, or any of us who lived on the Pacific coast of our country. So who we are as people who reside in God's pasture and who are surrounded by God's hand makes a difference. And when we tell people that we are God's people, when we are followers of Jesus, that matters. So that's what I've been thinking of. I'm not going to tell you how it matters because I think you already know. But I do encourage you to tune into worship tomorrow because Pastor Libby will be preaching again, and she has some really thought-provoking ideas about the text for this Sunday and about this Christ the King Sunday, and that she has written about in Christian Century, and so we've asked her to come and preach about that this week. And friends, oh my goodness, we have burned the mortgage. Our mortgage is paid off, and so we have a celebratory video, and I'm sure Pastor Stanton will talk about that a little bit. And so we want you to be a part of that celebration because you made it happen. And we are so thrilled about that, what that means for us as a church in the future, and how we can build the ministry at First Lutheran Church. So until tomorrow, be well, be kind, for Christ is with you.